In this part of his life, we are going to follow him from the years 1838. We're going to follow Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish author, philosopher, and world known name today. Left us a lot of writings and books and stories. He had this project of fulfilling his life by understanding himself and living to understand who he really was and how we are. And so he came to put the first steps in the direction of what we call modern existential psychology, understanding oneself through the lived life and experience in it. After the death of his father and these years where he indulged in pleasures, trying to be a kind of imitation of Don Juan, he went now, uh, after that loss, to reconcile himself, to finish his exams so he could become a theologian and then a priest and take over the tradition of the family. He also went, he got very sad by the loss of his teacher and friend, Paul Martin Müller, whom he had many talks and good friendship with. And so at the same time, he wanted to take the travel back home to his father's countryside in Seding in the west of Jutland, in an area between Ringkøbing and Ikast on the far west coast. But on his way, 3 weeks journey in July 1838, 1840, in July 1840, he went to Jutland in a carriage, stopping by Aarhus and then visiting Viborg, Holstebro, and looking at malls even. And so he tried to understand Jutland and to get that sense of traveling there. He didn't like traveling very much, in opposition to Jose Anderson, who went traveling a lot to Italy and other places and saw the travel as part of living. He saw the living in the fantasy as the real place to be living. So he was mostly in Copenhagen, meeting people there, talking to them on the street, understanding their way of life, indulging in conversations with them almost every day. He had a different way of like reaching into people's universe than others had. And so he didn't really make all these travels. He had 4 travels to Berlin and one to North Jutland in 1835, where he went to Gilleleje and that place by the sea in the northern part of Sjælland, the island of Jutland, northern of Copenhagen, and where he wrote in his diary that he really wanted to find that idea that could make him live and die for. And so he did start to do so, maybe without really knowing it, because after indulging in these pleasures we talked about in the third part, well, he put himself together. The death of the close ones around him did something to him, and also the way he felt disgust by himself, um, living that life where people just drowned their own voices in noise and drowned themselves in noise. So they should not like be with themselves. They had this profoundly deep attraction to going places where there are many people. This is something he started realizing very early, that many people cannot take being alone with themselves. So they have to drown it all the time in noises and talks and places where there are many people and drunkenness and so on. And so he's already on his way showing us part of this project. And then he had this famous but not so good criticism of Jose Anderson's book that was like what can you say, like killing a fly with a bullet. It was too big a shot for such a small play trial as it was at that time, but it was maybe just all a kind of rehearsal for the bigger work that he was gonna do later. Well, on his way to Jutland in these weeks of the summer of 1940, it took really many days to travel at that time. You have to remember, well, you had to go with a ship that could take 8 9 hours to sail just from Kalundborg to Aarhus. It was a relatively small pass, but took so long. And he had his servant Anders with him on this journey, and he didn't like the kind of traveling people do. And he said, "This is the characteristic for travels. It's like there is something shallow about it. it's not the way to dig into depths. With other words, it's like taking the fat out of the soup. And so he thought that it wasn't really something he liked. And so his journey and his destination was the village where his dad were born. It's like finding his roots again and going back to the place to see and live where it was his father came from, and why. And that's a kind of reconciliation maybe, but also a deeper look into yourself, to go and visit the place where you are from originally and see how it feels. And so he says in his diary, and so here I sit alone, and I have been alone all the time, but I'm not really aware of it. And I'm counting the hours to reaching the village of Siding. I have never remembered that any changes had been with my father, but I'm gonna see the places where he was as a poor boy guarding sheep, the places I, because of his descriptions, longed to see and get to. What if I get sick and get buried in the churchyard of Setting? Churchyard is Kierkegaard, it's like their surname, because everybody has died around him in his family. And so he had the name of Kierkegaard, and now he was going home. Could that be going home in more than one sense? Like also going home to die, getting back to the earth? And so he had these kind of thoughts on his way there. And so when he reached, he went to live with his faster, Elsa. It's the brother's sister from. It's a sister from the father's side. She was the one who inherited the piece of land that their grandpa had bought at that time, before he sold his shop. And so of course before his father sold his shop, but the piece of land that went all the way back to the old family. And so he could feel the poor situation this Elsa and her family were living in, compared to what he came from as a rich tradesman son from Copenhagen. For them, it was a big culture shock. And you must remember that at that time, just being out of Copenhagen was something totally different than people living a peasantry life in west of Jutland, lacking all the, at that time, modern equipments and service and access to goods. And so he could immediately feel that kind of change and poverty. And so he felt like living in their, getting into their life. He says, my poor aunt was like living like Odysseus' brothers lived hos Shirka. It's from the old story and mythology of Odysseus, who took this long journey, and he met this lady Shirka on the way. And it's like he was in a double-bound situation, being there with her, something that he wanted, but also wanted to get away from. For, as we know, if you have read this story, it is Shirka was a kind of magician woman that could turn people into animals, and really turned Odysseus' brothers into swine in a kind of punishment. So he was, at the same time, he could feel that maybe he was gonna get cursed out there, and so he wanted to get away from there. But at the same time, there is this attraction to coming the place where everything started, and his father had his young days, and knowing his original family. And one here can wonder, well, he didn't bring any presents to them, as some of the biographer says, and he did not really think about their life situation before he came there. It was a little strange, so to say, that he was really, it's like he was absent-minded of people. Maybe he was so self-indulged that he was absent-minded of the life of other people and how they were suffering. And maybe he was so much in his own mind and so-called suffering and losses and living the life he wanted to feel, that this came as a shock to him. It was like meeting that Shirka, the magician in the story of Odysseus. It was like a kind of a trap he had to get away from, otherwise he would lose that connectivity with himself. This is my interpretation. that there is something here out of order. You imagine, like, if you're going to visit some of your old family members, what do you imagine they are living if they are out in West Jutland and they are poor? And so we do not really know if he gave them help or he paid for his stay, but we know that he was there, and he both wanted to be there but also wanted to get away. Another reasoning here could be that his father was so generous to his old county and place. They say that he left a sum of money as income, and from his own income and rents, because when he sold his shop, he lived by lending his money and living off the rents, the leisure of that money from the bank. And he gave a lot also to his birthplace and the people in his old county. So maybe he thought, well, my dad has already paid for a lot of that and has already taken them in his generosity. But anyhow, there is no mention of him or any thank for giving anything extra. But he was well received, and when they said farewell to him, well, they said that the local priest, thanked him for bringing enlightenment to the area. I don't know if he was making fun of him or something, because the enlightenment they needed was the things that could uphold their life and not only the words and talks. But well, he finished his trip and went back to Copenhagen, where a new story had to begin in his life, the dance with and around the lady Regine, whom he fell in love with. He writes in his diary about her, saying, well, already before my father died, I was decided on her. He died, I was reading for the exams, and in all that time, I left her presence get more and more entwined in mine. And he's talking about the years 37, 38, where he is occupied by other stuff, and then the 39, 40, where he was reading to finish his exams and become educated from the university. But he had this girl in his mind and in his thoughts, and of course, for many people, it's a strange thing that he not already had found a girl. But this is what it is sometimes with philosophers and thinkers. It's not that easy, and it's not so what can you say, it doesn't give the same effect in their life as it does with maybe ordinary people who just find someone and settle down. And because of his nature, that double-minded nature of he wants his own project of life, and he's too much in his thoughts, and he had this devil wit in him that could say something very strange from time to time that people could not maybe really understand or relate to, everything make it very difficult. But he liked this girl, and he kept circling around her. And it's very likely that he saw her first time when he was visiting the first girl, Boletta, in their home, and her mother and sisters, that she came there, and then he noticed her and kept her in his mind. This is what's most likely could have happened, as the biographers would say about him. But well, it was in July 1840 that he really visits her in their home, and he wanna talk about her and try to keep his big feelings for her in a bit of distance. And so starts the love story between him and this girl called Regina. She was about 15 years old, 18 at that time. She was born in 1822, January 23rd. And she was also like Søren, from an environment that had money and had a very special place in Copenhagen. Her father was etatsråd, that means he was like a kind of economic director for the economic issues, like a finance guy who took care of what's going on in the state and finances, or part of it at least. And we know from Søren's dad that he had also gained a lot of wealth, maybe not at the same level, but well, it brought them both to that central part of the elite in Copenhagen, where they both also had many siblings. She had 6 sisters, and he had also 6 siblings, sisters and brothers. And she was also the youngest among them. And at the same time, their family were both attached to that Herrnhut brotherhood of Christian faith. So they had a lot of things in common, and he liked her and really felt that kind of indulgent in her way of being. She seems to be like a girl who was naive and fond of life in a very easygoing way, even though they also had these shared ideas of life as a heavy burden and seeking God's kingdom. So he could see these opposite sides in her than those he had. And he wanted really to confront her with his love and his passion for her. And so he did, tried at least at the day of September 8th, where he met her just outside their home and stopped her there. And she said, well, there is no one home. And he did not really understand it, but he understood that this was also a kind of invitation, that now they were alone and could talk more privately. And they sat alone in that living room, and she was a bit nervous, he says. And he asked her to play something for him, like she usually does, because that was the customs at those times, where people who met and wanted to engage, they could read poems for each other, show what they could of songs, play a little music, and try in that way to find out whether they fit and they like each other's way and nature of being. And he asked her to do that. It's like it didn't really succeed. And so what he does is he maybe also becomes a bit nervous. So he says, I took the notebook of music and closed it a bit hard, and threw it to the piano and said, oh, what do I care for music? It's you I'm seeking. I have been seeking you for 2 years. And well, in that silence that Lucy fell in the room, she was distracted and distorted, didn't know what to answer him, that young girl of only the age of around 18, 19, and he was just like that, without any kind of, what can you say, kind of precepts to what he wanted to say, just said it like that. And that's what happened when the feelings take over sometimes, and you're deeply nervous and you cannot really control your actions like the Don Juan would have done. And so it was a bad imitation at all costs. And he went to her father, he went to the street, didn't know what to do. And he went directly to her father in his office of finances and talked to him and said to him he liked his daughter and he wanted an answer. And the answer came a few days later that, well, yeah, she said yes, she'd liked him too, she would like to make an engagement. But at the same time, she told him she was also fond of a guy called Fritz, and she really liked a lot. And he could answer her, well, it wouldn't have helped you because I really wanted you. So he was really getting into that role of getting what he want. And in many ways, it happened so quickly and so fast, as I think many would also recognize, maybe in one way or another. It's so typically human life that is unfolding here when we fall in love with a storm and things happen so quickly, and we don't understand how we managed to do it and how the others responded. But it's like something just attracts us to each other and things happens in between that. That's very understandable. But not so long after, he becomes very much in doubt of what he has done. It's like he wakes up from this action he'd been in and stops up. And so he writes very shortly. There is not much left to read in from that period and that life. But he writes very shortly saying that, well, I had made a mistake. I liked the family and I indulged myself in visiting and being with them. And her father, I was really fond of forever after. But something in me had taken this wrong. I was a guilt-ridden person because of my vita ante acta, my life before that, my heavy mind. That was enough. I had suffered a lot in that time. And he says later, then, well, he erased every hint or note or anything he wrote that had something to do with this, to like make it clear why is it he repented, and why is it he like brought himself out of that engagement. He should have just gone through with it, like with everybody else, get engaged, get married, and become part of that new family. And the girl had said yes, and he was ready, and her father and family had accepted him. And so he didn't want anybody to understand. He said, I have deleted everything that could show any signs of what I was indulged in and what it was that I really had trouble with. And so people had all kind of guesses later, and some people would say a lot of things about him, that he was ill, he was sick, he was not normal in his mind, that he was of another orientation, that he couldn't really engage in sexual activities, he didn't have the power and the ability to do so anymore, and so on and so on. And well, the shortest view on that is that we do not know. We can guess, and people has been guessing, and everything he tried to get rid of, the guessing just made them worse. And so it's ironically how he just could have told how it is as a person who went seeking himself and trying to understand who he was. Well, he kept a lot of things secret, didn't really face himself with it. So you can say maybe it was too hard to open yourself to the public. And sometimes you understand that, because he's saying himself later that, well, people has this ability to make things that are bagatelles as big, huge, important events. And things that are important events, they make them to bagatelles and not so important issues in the life of a person. And that's why he do not want the world after his death to call these things bagatelles that were important to him, and vice versa. And well, you can understand that he was trying to shelter and shield himself from humans and people's society and how they were thinking about him and his ways of being. But I think it left a lot of question marks as well in that period. Well, anyhow, he was still engaged for a period in that fall of 1940 with a girl, and he was somehow romantic to her. And he wrote to her a lot and saying some beautiful things. Even in this moment, my dear Regina, I'm thinking of you. And when I think of you, you seem to be avoiding my thinking. It's not because I love you less, but because it's necessarily for me sometimes to be for myself. You are not out of my mind at all, not ever forgotten. On the contrary, you are very much alive with me. And when I think about your trustworthy mind, I'm happy and joyful again. And so when you are around me, everything disappears from my horizon that brings that limitation with it. And so he had these kind of philosophical words. I'm not sure if she understood it, and maybe it was just the way they wrote at that time. But well, if I wrote this to a girl today, she wouldn't understand what I'm saying. And I'm not sure I understand what he's saying. But it was maybe the way they wrote, and maybe it was his way of writing. He has another thing. He has a funny drawing of her, of himself, looking at her from the bridge of Copenhagen with a very big binocular, like he was some kind of general looking at someone. So he says, this is the bridge, and this is me with that binocular, and you know, and everything I can see out there, it is you I have my eyes on, something like that. I'm yours forever. And so it's like he's trying in many ways to live that love story as we maybe all have lived or tried, or many of us at least, when you are in your senses and do crazy stupid things, and you feel some kind childish and out of yourself, and you do things you don't usually do without that attachment and that love that makes you change somehow. Then he kept occasionally, of course, visiting the family and took her out to see a theater performance, or maybe took her for a walk and hanged up in himself to show his manhood and show his ability to be that man in her life that could give her that strength and pleasure. But many times he had also bad conscience and felt that he was wiping and he was not really happy. And it's like his guilt has taken over in his mind, and he wanted to deeply make her happy, but it's like he felt he couldn't. And so something in him got so much in conflict that he really had trouble keeping himself together in that period. And in a year after, in 1841, his sadness came so hard on him that he had to write himself out of it. And he said, oh God, give me the courage to hope. And the only thing that can really help me out and give me that hope is that I can die, and in my death talk about that love that I do not dare to live anymore, and in the same time makes me happy and unhappy. So things were going out of control, and their relation were also getting downhill. It's difficult to see whether she could understand him, but it's like he could not go on with the next step. Something was in the way, something would forever stand in the way. What we seem to know, and the biographers are telling us, is that she tried different tactics to make him cheer up and to make him feel her compassion and love for him, and tried to get close to him so he could rest in that relation and maybe fulfill it and go on with it. But he was maybe too much in his own mind and the webs of his own thoughts and guilt that he couldn't. That was maybe part of what he felt was the curse on his family. There's something just blocking his way in going on with what he was doing. And so she gave up in the end. She couldn't neither get to him by joke or by being serious or being so tender to him. So in many ways, she had also had enough of something that she couldn't understand. She ceased really to understand him really, truly, on what he's thinking, what's his trouble, what is it, because she just couldn't get through. And he drowned himself in, making preachers and working as that theologian, priest. He had educated himself too and written a disputate, a big work that this is about the phrase of irony that he's going to talk about later. But she couldn't understand him, and there was not that development that she hoped for. And he wanted really, in some way, maybe trying, hoping that she could end it. At one point, she was very mad at him for saying that you must be mad, and wanting to end it, because she really started liking him so much and knowing him so well. It's like she was really containing him in her mind and way of being, and she could understand him. This is how it seems. So why he was running away from her all that much is a mystery, and it's a tragedy at the same time. I don't understand it. I don't think even the people who was writing about him, they really understand it. But so in the summer of 1841, he sent her the ring of engagement back with a short letter, because he was not really sure he could continue this destiny of his. And he said, please forget about the person who's writing this. Forgive a human that how much he really wanted, thus didn't want and couldn't make a girl happy. It's very strange, but it's like he's confessing, and he's writing, well, guilty, not guilty. What is it? And this is the big question that kept also circling around his life, that he was hiding and he could not talk about and he could not make her happy with. Was it just that kind of craziness that could be over philosophers, or was it an illness he had took with him from these years where he lived in the, or was it just the heavy mind of maybe becoming cursed even though he wasn't? Or was it the lack of ability to go through with the marriage, making her happy sexually, like really performing as a man should be? Uh, this is also something to be taken into consideration. It's very difficult and it's very sad to read about these issues, how uh, it is. And so there is a note from her 60 years later in some memoirs where she writes a remembrance about when he sent her this letter of breaking up the engagement. She says that, well, it was clear to me that it was a kind of reflection of his heavy mind and nothing else. And that's why I asked him to give up this kind of thinking and accepted that, okay, um, we could live this period through. Um, and then he said to her, while writing on that big issue on the word of irony, and he changed his mind and told her, will you hang out with me until this one has ended? And she remembered things little different than he did, but at the same time he wanted to push her away. He was like determined on pushing her away from him. Was it maybe because he was so much in his mind that his real love and his real marriage was to the books and the ideas that he was gonna give birth to, and that she was a distraction, and he couldn't make her happy because he was so much in that other world that he really didn't live that normal life that most people would like to have. So it can be many things, and personally I cheer for that idea that he could both have been half incapable sexually or not that strong giving male, and at the same time so much in the world of ideas and thoughts that, well, if she comes in as well, he has to choose between either or. He has to give birth to all these ideas he just got hold on, going with that project of finding himself and understanding who he is in truly depth, and discovering it, describing it, containing the life of psychology existence and what's surrounding it. Or he could live that marriage life with her, having kids and just being normal, going to his work, preaching, getting back to his home. That's another project altogether, but he wouldn't have the capacity all the time to really give those essences that was left to us. And so you can ask yourself, what's the biggest tragedy or the biggest blessing? Have we gotten more out of him writing all this, or would we just have seen him happy? Isn't that the course of life, that we want to find someone and live with and be happy, instead of just like sitting here recording all these talks and spending time on it because you are not living happy and you are not finding that happiness that you were really seeking in the first place. So personally, I can really understand what he's going through, and I can feel it. And it's just like a kind of, again, a kind of curse or kind of distraction from the normality that we call normal. Finding a love, having some kids, and having a good story of life where you are in balance. If your mind is too driven to achieve something outside of that family, outside of achieving her, the woman in your life, and making her the project of your life, you will lose it. And maybe you will lose it even if you're focusing on her, but it's something like a combination of both, something physically, mentally, psychologically, that has, in my opinion, taken over in his life, and that feeling of guilt. We must not underestimate that, how much we can feel guilt over some things in our lives, that it can overtake our soul almost entirely. Very strangely, though, that he, at the same time, in that year of 1840-41, was working very hard on that very beautiful work that was called on the phrase of irony. And it was actually a kind of a shorter story from a diary from his teacher, Paul Martin Müller. He had been writing about irony, not in the same depth, but something suggests that he could have been talking with Søren Kierkegaard about it some years earlier, or maybe he grasped the idea from there and kept it in his mind and now unfolded it. So what is this all about, and what will happen after that in his life in the years of 41 and 42, I will keep it up to our next recording.